I visited Washington DC over the period the 17th to the 19th of June for various meetings in relation to US immigration reform, which remains a key government priority. My programme included separate discussions with Congressman Luis Gutierrez, Congressman Paul Ryan, Senator Pat Leahy, members of the Congressional Friends of Ireland Group, House Judiciary Committee member Congressman Mark Amodei, Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, House Democratic Caucus Chairman Congressman Xavier Becerra, and White House Domestic Policy Council Director Ms. Cecilia Munoz. I also met with Irish American community leaders, including from the Irish Lobby for Immigration Reform, the Chicago Celts for Immigration Reform, Irish Apostolate USA, and the Ancient Order of Hibernians, with whom the government has worked closely on our shared US immigration reform agenda. Each of my meetings proved very useful, offering different insights and analyses into the prospects for when progress towards legislation that will provide relief for currently undocumented Irish migrants, and also a facility for additional future legal migration between Ireland and the US. There was widespread consensus that an already complex political landscape had become even more complicated by the electoral defeat earlier in the month of the Republican House Majority Leader. The general sense which I received from interlocutors was that further time would be needed to assess the full implications of this development for ongoing immigration reform efforts, particularly from the perspective of the upcoming congressional midterm elections. I found it encouraging that proponents of immigration reform in Congress appear determined to persist with their efforts, and that they hope that further progress may yet prove possible this year. As my visit took place, Mr. Kevin McCarthy was elected as the new Republican House Majority Leader. Through our embassy in Washington and also directly, the government looks forward to working further with Mr. McCarthy, House Speaker John Boehner and other key congressional figures on both sides of the political aisle, and with the US administration, with a view to advancing Ireland's immigration reform-related objectives. Since my return from Washington, I understand that there has been a further sharpening of the political engagement in the US Congress in relation to the situation of unaccompanied migrant children who are seeking to enter the United States via its southern border. This may now impact negatively on the prospects for wider immigration reform progress being achieved over the immediate period ahead. It would clearly be disappointing if this proves to be the case. Nevertheless, as I noted earlier, we will continue our intensive efforts to persuade members of Congress to seize every opportunity to make immigration reform a reality. Well, we have two objectives in all of this. First of all, there are 50,000 Irish people in the United States who are undocumented, who can't come home for funerals, for family events, and so on. And we need to secure a path to legalisation for those people. Secondly, effectively since 1965, the flow of immigration, legal immigration from Ireland to the United States has dried up, and we want to find a way of doing that. The bill that was passed in the United States Senate would do that. It would provide a path to legalisation for the undocumented Irish. It would also provide for an E3 visa, which would be available to, we estimate, about 10,000 Irish people per annum to travel and to work in the United States legally. It would make a very major change. In the House of Representatives, there has not been agreement on that bill. It is a very sensitive political issue. My assessment of the situation is that I think that the people that I have spoken to, I think accept that at some stage immigration legislation is going to be passed by the Congress. There are about 11 million people undocumented altogether in the United States. It is a huge issue, but of course it plays politically. And in the run into elections, people look over their shoulder, look to what they're hearing in their own constituencies and districts, and respond accordingly.
Thank you.
And the most recent issue, which has, I think, come into play in it, is the number of children who are crossing the US-Mexican border and who are unaccompanied. Well, first of all, in relation to the separate issue, which is not the subject of the current question, my department and our embassy have been working on that and are working on that with the US administration, and I'm hopeful that we will have a satisfactory conclusion to that. In relation to the main issue of immigration reform, this is an issue where I think right across the political spectrum in the United States, it is accepted that there will have to be legislation on immigration. You cannot have a situation where there are 11 million people undocumented in the United States, many of them working in various areas of the economy. There is an economic driver, I think, in this issue as well. There are some areas of the American economy, agriculture, for example, farm working, where very heavily dependent on immigrant labour, and there's obviously issues in relation to security and so on. And I think everybody accepts that this is going to have to be done. But there is a question of political will, and that's obviously a matter for the US legislature. We continue to remain in close contact with key figures in that legislature. My own view is that it's much more a case now of when rather than if there will be immigration legislation in the US.
Question number 4 in the name of Deputy Brendan Smith.
Thank you, Cancor.
Cancor, I have a formal reply to Deputy Smith's question, which is identical to the reply to. Yes. So if it's okay, I'll take that as read and just answer the question. The direct answer to your question is yes, I am more hopeful than I was a month ago. When the Republican majority leader lost in the primary election, there was a lot of speculation at the time that that was directly related to the immigration issue, and I feared that would play very negatively in the politics in Congress. In fact, when I visited there, I was very encouraged by the very clear statements I was getting from both sides of the political divide in Congress that they want to do this, that there is a necessity to legislate to deal with immigration. The question is, of course, when that will be done. And one of the problems in the politics of Capitol Hill is that there is never a good time in which to do it. There's always another issue. There's a row over the budget. That's what happened last year. The current issue, the issue that is most directly impacting on it now, is the fact that there are large numbers of children being moved across the Mexican border. They're unaccompanied. There are allegations of some very unpleasant people being involved in the movement of those children. It's playing as a big issue in public discussion and in the media in the United States. And therefore, it is making it very difficult for legislators to address the issue of legislation in that environment. Now, that's the immediate issue. I believe that there is a desire and a wish and a will to do immigration legislation and to get this issue dealt with, for political reasons, for economic reasons, for security reasons, a whole pile of reasons. The issue is when it's going to be done.
Thank you.
Now, we've continued to keep our pressure on and to keep our dialogue and our discussion open with people on both sides of the political divide on this issue. That work will continue. But yes, I am more optimistic than I was a month ago about it. Well, first of all, I met with Nancy Pelosi when I was in Washington, and I understand her feeling about this, because clearly what is happening on the Mexican border is playing very negatively in the whole immigration debate. The issue of the possibility of the President taking executive action is something that I discussed with his domestic policy advisor, Cecilia Munoz, who leads on the issue of immigration. The position in relation to that is that, as I said, there are 11 million who are undocumented. I'm told that there are deportations at the moment at the rate of about 1,200 a day. And this is also a huge issue in many communities and neighbourhoods where there are big immigrant populations. And clearly there is pressure on the President and on the White House to take executive action to address that particular issue.
Thank you.
The President, as I understand it, has said that if Congress doesn't legislate, that he will have to consider taking some executive action. The nature of that action is obviously something that we're not a party to. Well, first of all, can I thank Deputy Smith for his support and encouragement on this particular issue, and also to join with him in expressing our thanks to the various organisations that we work with in the United States and who work with Irish immigrants there, and who do great work, and indeed their work is coordinated very closely with our embassy in Washington. I think the position here is, it is a very difficult political issue. I mean, immigration is a difficult political issue anywhere. It's a difficult political issue in the United States. But it seems to me that it is not sustainable not to have legislation dealing with the various range of issues which touch on immigration, not least the fact that there is now such a very large population, 11 million people in the United States, who are undocumented, who are in practice integrated into the United States community, people who've been there for 20, 30 years, who have children who are American citizens, but who yet themselves are liable to be deported, many of whom are running businesses, many of whom are employed in the economy, sections of the American economy that is very heavily dependent on immigrant labour, and it is not sustainable that this won't be addressed at some point by way of legislation, and everybody accepts that. The question is when it is going to be done, and that comes down to politics, and we all understand this. We all understand that when there's a difficult political issue and people start playing to their own audience, to their own base, to their own supporters, and you're right, that there are some constituencies in some districts where immigration plays differently than it does in others, but that's changing too. Because again, in the discussions that I've had, I've heard of areas where immigration used to be an issue, or if it was an issue, that it was an issue that played, not to do something. But now that's changing because of the population composition. I agree with you also. I think it's important that we don't raise expectations beyond what can be achieved. This has gone on for a very long time. But I do believe that this issue, and I think there's a growing political understanding in the political system that this is an issue that is going to have to be addressed. The question is when it is going to be addressed. I would prefer to see it addressed quickly, obviously in the interest of the undocumented Irish who are there, and indeed also to get the issue of the E3 visa put in place. But we are very much in the hands of the legislators on Capitol Hill, and they in turn, of course, are in the hands of their voters. And there's another midterm election in November.